2 days left before your soulmate makes a decision that changes everything. There's a strange stillness that shows up right before something meaningful shifts, and you may have felt it without knowing why. Not excitement, not fear, just a quiet sense that something in the background of your life has paused and turned toward you. This moment isn't loud. It doesn't rush you. It simply exists, asking you to notice it. Over the next 2 days, what's unfolding isn't about dramatic moves or sudden confessions. It's about a decision forming slowly, the kind that takes time because it carries weight. Your soulmate isn't reacting to a single moment. They're responding to a long internal process that's been happening in pieces, often unnoticed, even by them. You might think decisions like this happen all at once, but they don't. They begin in reflection. In moments when distractions fade. In nights when sleep doesn't come easily because certain thoughts keep returning. Not forcefully, not obsessively, just persistently. That persistence is what you're sensing now. This decision isn't rooted in confusion. It's rooted in clarity that took a long time to arrive. Your soulmate has already moved through doubt, through denial, through trying to reason their way out of what they feel. What remains now is the part where reasoning stops working. There's a difference between wanting certainty and needing truth. Wanting certainty makes people hesitate. Needing truth makes them act. These 2 days sit right in that space where truth can no longer be postponed without cost. You may notice that your own emotions feel steadier than expected. You're not spiraling. You're not imagining every possible outcome. Instead, you feel grounded, as if whatever happens next won't undo you. That steadiness didn't come from indifference. It came from growth. Earlier in your life, a moment like this would have made you restless. You would have searched for signs, replayed conversations, questioned timing. Now, there's a quiet trust in yourself. You know you can meet whatever unfolds without losing your balance. Your soulmate is standing in a similar place internally. They're no longer asking whether this connection mattered. They're asking what kind of life they want to live if they continue to ignore it. That question doesn't come lightly. It comes after exhaustion sets in. Exhaustion from pretending certain feelings don't exist. Exhaustion from choosing what looks easier over what feels honest. Exhaustion from carrying something unspoken for too long. That's why these 2 days feel specific. Not because time is running out in a dramatic sense, but because the internal debate has reached its natural end. When reflection finishes its work, action follows quietly. You might sense this as a shift in energy rather than information. A calm pressure, not pushing you, just reminding you that something real is aligning. Alignment doesn't announce itself. It settles. This isn't about rushing toward an outcome. It's about recognizing that avoidance has stopped being an option on the other side. Your soulmate isn't choosing out of fear of losing you. They're choosing out of respect for truth. Respect changes everything. They're not looking for reassurance right now. They're looking for integrity. For a way to live that doesn't require suppressing what feels real. That kind of decision doesn't depend on your reaction. It depends on their honesty. That's important for you to understand, because it means you don't have to do anything. You don't need to signal. You don't need to intervene. You don't need to protect the moment. It's already protected by readiness. Your role right now is simply to remain present. Presence doesn't mean waiting anxiously. It means staying connected to yourself. Not numbing. Not overthinking. Just aware. Awareness keeps you aligned regardless of what choice is made. You may notice memories surfacing without emotion attached. Not nostalgia, not longing, just recognition. Moments you didn't fully understand at the time now make sense. That's not coincidence. That's perspective catching up. Perspective often arrives right before decisions solidify. Your soulmate has been revisiting the same memories, but from a different angle. They're seeing patterns instead of moments. They're recognizing what stayed consistent even when circumstances changed. That recognition carries clarity. This decision isn't about choosing someone. It's about choosing alignment. Choosing a path that doesn't require compartmentalizing their heart. Choosing honesty over convenience. Honesty feels heavier at first. But it becomes lighter than avoidance ever was. These 2 days matter because they mark the end of internal negotiation. The part where someone stops asking what they should do and starts acknowledging what they already know. You might feel tempted to label this as fate or destiny. You don't need to. Labels often simplify what's actually complex and human. This is about timing meeting readiness, nothing more mystical than that. God doesn't rush people into decisions. He waits until resistance wears itself out. Until truth can be held without fear. That's what's happening now. You may sense God's presence here not as instruction, but as calm. A reminder that you don't need to force outcomes for things to unfold as they should. Calm doesn't mean passive. It means grounded. Grounded people don't chase clarity. They recognize it when it arrives. This moment isn't asking you to hope or fear. It's asking you to trust yourself. Trust that you can remain whole regardless of the decision made. Trust that your peace isn't dependent on someone else choosing in a particular way. That trust is what allows alignment to complete itself. Your soulmate's decision will change something, but not in the way you might expect. It won't rewrite your life overnight. It won't suddenly explain everything. What it will do is remove ambiguity. And ambiguity is what drains people the most. Clarity restores energy. Whether that clarity brings movement or closure, it will be clean. Not chaotic. Not dramatic. Clean. That's the kind of change that actually lasts. You don't need to prepare for impact. There is no collision coming. There is a settling. A decision that feels inevitable because it was earned through reflection. Over these 2 days, pay attention to your own inner quiet. Not your thoughts, but the space between them. That space tells you more than any sign ever could. You're not being tested right now. You're being trusted. Trusted to stay present. Trusted to stay aligned. Trusted to let truth move at its own pace. Whatever happens after these 2 days, you won't be the same person you were before them. Not because something external changed, but because you stayed grounded while something important finalized itself. And that grounding will stay with you, long after this moment passes. This isn't the beginning of chaos. It's the end of uncertainty. And sometimes, that's the most meaningful change of all. It begins in a way that's easy to miss if you're not paying attention. Not with urgency, not with anticipation, but with a subtle emotional shift you can't quite explain. You might notice your thoughts slowing down around this connection, as if your mind has stopped racing ahead and decided to stay present instead. That slowing isn't accidental. It's a sign that something real is settling into place. Over these next 2 days, the story isn't moving forward loudly. It's moving inward. What's unfolding isn't about action yet, it's about realization completing itself. Your soulmate isn't weighing options anymore. They've already done that work. They're sitting with what remains after doubt has burned itself out. You may not have seen this process, but it's been happening steadily. In quiet moments when they were alone with their thoughts. In choices they made that didn't bring the peace they expected. In comparisons they tried to avoid but couldn't. What's left now is a simple question that no longer has multiple answers. That question isn't about you versus someone else. It's about alignment versus compromise. For a long time, they told themselves that feelings fade, that timing fixes everything, that silence makes things easier. And for a while, those beliefs helped them cope. But coping and living aren't the same thing. Coping delays truth. Living requires it. That's why this moment feels different. You might notice that you're not emotionally bracing the way you used to. There's no tightening in your chest, no mental rehearsal of worst-case scenarios. You're not preparing yourself for disappointment or victory. You're simply aware. That awareness is new, and it didn't come from detachment. It came from strength. Strength that grew quietly while you weren't watching. There was a time when being in this position would have made you restless. You would have wanted answers immediately, clarity now, reassurance before you could breathe. Now, breathing feels natural. You're not holding your breath for an outcome. You're grounded enough to let the moment exist. That grounding matters more than any decision. Your soulmate is experiencing something similar, but from a different angle. They're not anxious anymore. Anxiety comes from uncertainty. What they're feeling now is resolve forming. Resolve doesn't argue. It doesn't rush. It simply settles and waits for the right moment to act. Resolve is quiet because it doesn't need permission. You might sense this as a change in energy rather than communication. A feeling that something is aligning without words. That feeling isn't imagination. It's the byproduct of two people reaching emotional readiness at the same time, even if they're not standing in the same room. Readiness doesn't announce itself. It becomes obvious in hindsight. These 2 days are important because they mark the end of internal negotiation. The part where someone keeps revisiting the same question from different angles, hoping one of them will make the truth disappear. That doesn't work anymore. When truth refuses to be reasoned away, it turns into action. Action doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like choosing honesty over convenience. You don't need to do anything right now because this isn't being decided by your influence. It's being decided by integrity on the other side. That's important, because it means whatever choice is made won't depend on pressure, persuasion, or fear of loss. It will depend on clarity. Clarity feels steady, not intense. It doesn't spike your emotions. It grounds them. That's why you may feel surprisingly calm. Calm isn't indifference. Calm is your nervous system recognizing that you can handle what comes next. Earlier in your life, you needed certainty to feel safe. Now, you trust yourself enough to face uncertainty without panic. That shift didn't happen overnight. It was built through moments when you chose self-respect over chasing reassurance. Those moments strengthened you more than you realize. Your soulmate has been through a parallel process. They've tested distractions. They've tried to convince themselves that what they felt was temporary, situational, or replaceable. None of that worked. What remains is honesty they can't ignore anymore. Honesty always demands something. Not drama. Not sacrifice. Responsibility. Responsibility for one's own truth. You might find that memories are surfacing differently now. Not emotionally charged, not painful, just clear. Moments that once felt confusing now feel obvious. That's what happens when perspective arrives. Perspective doesn't change the past. It clarifies it. Your soulmate is revisiting those same memories, but with the awareness they didn't have before. They're seeing patterns instead of isolated moments. They're noticing what remained consistent even when circumstances shifted. Consistency reveals truth. This decision isn't about choosing love in a romantic sense. It's about choosing alignment in a personal one. Choosing a life that doesn't require emotional compartmentalization. Choosing not to silence a part of themselves to keep things stable. Stability that requires suppression eventually collapses. That's why these 2 days feel like a turning point. Not because something explosive is about to happen, but because something unsustainable has reached its limit. When internal pressure releases, clarity takes its place. You may feel tempted to overinterpret signs or imagine outcomes. You don't need to. Overinterpretation pulls you out of presence. Presence keeps you aligned. Alignment doesn't require effort. It requires honesty. God's role in moments like this isn't to force decisions. It's to allow truth to surface when people are strong enough to face it. Strength doesn't mean fearlessness. It means willingness. Willingness to live without pretending. Your role right now is not to wait passively or hope intensely. It's to stay connected to yourself. To notice how steady you feel. To trust that whatever clarity arrives won't undo you. That trust is the foundation everything meaningful stands on. Your soulmate's decision will change something, but not by creating chaos. It will change the emotional landscape by removing ambiguity. Ambiguity drains energy because it keeps people suspended between possibilities. Clarity restores energy. Whether that clarity leads to movement or closure, it will feel clean. No emotional whiplash. No confusion. Just truth settling into place. You might feel a quiet sense of acceptance forming inside you. Not resignation. Acceptance. Acceptance that whatever unfolds will align with who you are now, not who you were when uncertainty ruled your choices. You're not the same person anymore. You don't need to prepare for impact because this moment isn't about collision. It's about convergence. Two internal processes reaching completion at the same time. Convergence doesn't announce itself. It simply happens. As these 2 days continue, pay attention to your own inner rhythm. Not your thoughts, but your sense of balance. That balance tells you more than any external signal ever could. You're not being tested. You're being met. Met at a point where growth has done its work. Where avoidance no longer feels like an option. Where truth can be acknowledged without fear. This story doesn't rush forward from here. It settles. It allows the decision to finish forming naturally. And when it does, it won't feel shocking. It will feel inevitable. Not because it was destined, but because it was earned. And that's the kind of change that lasts. It shows up as a quiet heaviness in the air, the kind you feel before rain even when the sky still looks clear. You may not be thinking about anything specific, yet something inside you knows a shift is finishing its work. Not beginning. Finishing. That distinction matters, because beginnings feel restless, but endings that make room for truth feel grounded. What's happening now isn't suspense. It's gravity. Over these 2 days, the decision forming on the other side isn't moving back and forth anymore. It isn't circling possibilities. It's settling into one direction with a calm that can't be shaken by second thoughts. When a person reaches this stage, they stop asking what feels easier and start asking what feels honest enough to live with. You may notice that you're not emotionally leaning forward the way you used to. There's no urge to reach out, no impulse to test the moment, no desire to interfere. That doesn't mean you care less. It means you trust the process more. You trust yourself to remain steady regardless of what takes shape. That trust didn't come from optimism. It came from experience. There were times in the past when waiting felt unbearable because it was filled with uncertainty. You waited while doubting your worth. You waited while questioning timing. You waited while replaying conversations and rewriting endings in your head. This waiting is different. It isn't empty. It's full of awareness. Awareness changes the quality of time. Your soulmate has been moving through their own version of awareness. Not suddenly, not dramatically. Slowly, through moments when they realized that distractions weren't working anymore. That new routines didn't quiet the same thoughts. That comfort didn't feel like peace. Peace doesn't require constant effort. Avoidance does. They reached the point where avoidance became heavier than honesty. And when that happens, a decision stops being optional. It becomes necessary for inner balance. This isn't about choosing someone. It's about choosing congruence between what they feel and how they live. Congruence is rare because it demands responsibility. You might sense this shift as a subtle emotional neutrality within yourself. Not numbness. Neutrality. You're not swinging between hope and fear. You're not attaching your sense of self to an outcome. You're standing in the middle, aware that whatever happens will be integrated, not disruptive. That neutrality is strength. Earlier, being in the middle felt unsafe. You believed clarity only existed at extremes. either certainty or detachment. Now, you know clarity can exist in the middle, where truth is allowed to breathe without being forced into shape. This stage of the story isn't about anticipation. It's about readiness to receive clarity without collapsing into it. You may find yourself reflecting on how often you once equated intensity with meaning. How you believed that if something mattered, it had to consume you. That belief pulled you into emotional turbulence more than once. You don't carry that belief anymore. Now, meaning feels steady. Your soulmate has undergone a similar shift. They're no longer mistaking emotional highs for truth. They've recognized patterns instead of moments. They've seen how certain feelings persisted regardless of circumstance, and how others faded once novelty wore off. Patterns tell the truth that moments try to hide. This decision isn't emerging from longing. It's emerging from clarity built over time. That's why it doesn't feel rushed. It feels deliberate. Deliberation doesn't come with anxiety. It comes with resolve. Resolve doesn't announce itself loudly. It settles and waits. You might notice that your intuition feels sharper now, but quieter. It's not pulling you toward a conclusion. It's anchoring you in the present. That anchoring allows you to witness the moment instead of being swept into it. Witnessing is different from waiting. Waiting implies lack. Witnessing implies awareness. You're witnessing something align without needing to intervene. That's new for you. In the past, you felt responsible for outcomes. You believed that if you didn't act, things would fall apart. Life has shown you otherwise. Not everything meaningful requires your effort. Some things require your restraint. This moment exists because both sides are finally capable of restraint. Capable of letting truth surface without manipulating it. Capable of allowing a decision to complete itself without panic. You may feel a sense of quiet respect for what's unfolding, even if you don't know exactly what it will look like. Respect comes from recognizing weight. Weight doesn't need embellishment. This story is heavy in a calm way. God's presence in moments like this isn't theatrical. It's stabilizing. It doesn't push people toward decisions before they're ready. It allows internal processes to reach their natural conclusion. You're feeling that allowance now. Allowance feels like peace. You might notice that your mind isn't asking, "What if?" questions anymore. It's asking, "What is?" That shift from speculation to reality is subtle but powerful. Reality doesn't ask you to imagine. It asks you to observe. Observation creates clarity. Your soulmate is observing themselves honestly for the first time in a long while. Observing what remains true when excuses fall away. Observing what feels heavy when ignored and lighter when acknowledged. Acknowledgement changes internal chemistry. That's why these 2 days feel final in an internal sense. Not final as in ending everything. Final as in completing a cycle of avoidance. When cycles complete, energy changes. You can feel that change in how calm you are. Calm doesn't mean you don't care. It means you're no longer trying to control. Control once felt like safety to you. Now, safety comes from alignment. Alignment between what you feel, what you believe, and how you choose to live. Alignment doesn't shout. It settles. This stage of the journey isn't asking you to prepare for good news or brace for disappointment. It's asking you to stay honest with yourself. To notice how grounded you feel. To recognize that whatever clarity arrives will meet you where you are now, not where you were before. You're not fragile anymore. That doesn't mean you're closed. It means you're intact. Intact people don't shatter when truth arrives. They integrate it. Integration is quiet work. You might also sense that you're less concerned with how this looks from the outside. You're not imagining how it will be explained or justified. External narratives don't hold the same power over you anymore. Internal alignment matters more. This decision will change something, but the change won't be chaotic. It will be structural. It will remove ambiguity. It will simplify emotional space. Simplification isn't loss. It's relief. Relief comes when something unsustainable ends. That unsustainable thing wasn't the connection itself. It was the silence around it. Silence that required effort to maintain. Silence that asked both of you to ignore parts of yourselves. That silence is reaching its natural end. You may feel moments of gratitude surfacing unexpectedly. Gratitude for patience you didn't know you had. Gratitude for growth that didn't feel like growth at the time. Gratitude for distance that allowed clarity to form. Those moments weren't wasted. This part of the story doesn't push forward. It deepens. It allows the internal decision to finish forming without interference. It respects the process enough not to rush it. Respect is what makes clarity clean. You're not being asked to decide anything right now. You're being asked to remain present. Present enough to notice how stable you feel. Present enough to recognize that you're capable of meeting whatever unfolds without abandoning yourself. That capability is the real transformation. Whatever the outcome of this decision, it won't define your worth. It won't rewrite your identity. It will simply reveal truth that was already there. Truth doesn't arrive to disrupt grounded people. It arrives to align with them. As these 2 days continue, stay with your own steadiness. Let it anchor you. Let it remind you how far you've come from the version of yourself that needed answers immediately to feel safe. You don't need that anymore. This story is moving toward clarity, not drama. Toward resolution, not chaos. Toward honesty, not fantasy. And you are ready for that. Not because you know what will happen, but because you know who you are, regardless of what does. It arrives as a moment of deep quiet, the kind that makes you realize how much noise you used to carry without noticing. Not external noise, but the internal kind. The mental commentary. The emotional static. Right now, that noise has thinned out, and what remains feels solid, undeniable, and strangely calm. This calm isn't emptiness. It's readiness settling into place. What's unfolding now isn't suspense. It's completion. You may notice that your attention isn't jumping anymore. Your mind isn't racing ahead, trying to predict what will happen when the decision finally lands. You're not rehearsing reactions or preparing emotional defenses. Instead, there's a grounded awareness, like you're standing firmly on your own ground while something important finishes forming nearby. That steadiness is new. In the past, moments like this would have made you uneasy. You would have mistaken calm for disinterest or feared that silence meant something was wrong. You learned to associate emotional intensity with meaning, so when intensity faded, you assumed connection was fading too. You don't think that way anymore. Now you understand that real decisions don't grow out of chaos. They grow out of clarity. Your soulmate has reached that same understanding. What they're standing in right now isn't confusion. It's the aftermath of clarity. The point where all the internal questions have already been answered, and what remains is the willingness to live with those answers. That willingness doesn't come quickly. They've already argued with themselves. Already tried to explain things away. Already tested whether distance would make the feeling dissolve. It didn't. And when something survives distance, distraction, and time, it demands to be taken seriously. That's why these 2 days feel weighty without feeling urgent. You may sense that your own emotional posture has changed. You're not leaning forward into hope, and you're not leaning back into self-protection. You're upright. Balanced. Available without being exposed. That posture allows you to meet truth without bending yourself around it. Earlier versions of you didn't have that balance. Earlier, you felt responsible for outcomes. If something didn't move forward, you blamed yourself for not doing enough. If something ended, you questioned whether you misread the signs. Now, you recognize that responsibility only extends to how you show up, not how others decide. That recognition freed you. Your soulmate is confronting their own responsibility right now. Responsibility not to you, but to themselves. Responsibility to stop living between options. To stop compartmentalizing feelings so life looks orderly on the outside while remaining unsettled on the inside. Order without honesty eventually collapses. They're not choosing from fear. Fear already had its chance. Fear kept them silent, cautious, and delayed. What's guiding them now is something steadier. Self-respect. The kind that doesn't shout, but doesn't back down either. You may feel this as a subtle internal nod rather than excitement. A sense of "this makes sense," even without knowing the outcome. That sense is your intuition recognizing alignment instead of chasing reassurance. Reassurance used to be everything to you. Now, alignment is. Alignment doesn't promise comfort. It promises coherence. Coherence between what's felt, what's believed, and what's lived. That coherence is what's being chosen now, on the other side of this connection. You might notice that your memories are surfacing without emotional charge. Moments that once made you wonder now simply exist as facts. That emotional neutrality isn't coldness. It's perspective. Perspective comes when you're no longer trying to extract meaning from the past to justify the present. Your soulmate is experiencing something similar. They're no longer romanticizing or minimizing what was. They're seeing it plainly. And plain truth is hard to ignore. This decision isn't about rewriting history. It's about refusing to keep repeating it. Repetition without growth is stagnation. Growth requires acknowledgement. Acknowledgement is what's happening now. You don't feel pulled to intervene because you sense that intervention isn't required. What's unfolding doesn't need your push or your patience. It needs space. Space to finish forming without interference. Space is often mistaken for distance. It's actually respect. God's role in this moment isn't to orchestrate drama or force reunions. It's to allow people to reach honesty without panic. Panic short-circuits clarity. Calm completes it. That's why everything feels slower but more certain. You may notice that your sense of time feels different. 2 days doesn't feel like a countdown. It feels like a window where something internal settles fully. Not pressure. Finality of process. Finality doesn't mean an ending. It means no more internal debate. Your soulmate isn't weighing possibilities anymore. They're weighing integrity. Integrity isn't flexible. It asks a simple question: can I live with myself if I continue like this? When that question is asked honestly, decisions become inevitable. You may also feel a shift in how you view yourself in this story. You're not waiting to be chosen. You're not measuring your worth against someone else's clarity. You're simply present, aware that whatever is decided will meet you as you are now, not as you once were. That's a powerful position. Earlier, you would have felt vulnerable here. Now, you feel capable. Capable of listening without absorbing. Capable of responding without over-explaining. Capable of walking away without resentment if that's what alignment requires. That capability didn't come from closing your heart. It came from strengthening it. This part of the story isn't dramatic because drama isn't needed anymore. The tension that once demanded noise has already been resolved internally. What remains is execution, and execution is quiet. Quiet doesn't mean insignificant. It means deliberate. You may sense a quiet respect for what's unfolding, even if you don't know exactly what shape it will take. Respect comes from recognizing weight without needing spectacle. This moment has weight. Not the kind that presses down, but the kind that anchors. You might also notice that your body feels settled. Breathing feels natural. Shoulders aren't tight. That physical response matters. The body often knows when something is resolving before the mind does. Resolution doesn't always feel like relief. Sometimes it feels like grounding. This decision will change something, but it won't disrupt your sense of self. It will simplify the emotional landscape by removing uncertainty. Uncertainty is what drained you before. Clarity, even when challenging, restores energy. Energy returns when something unfinished ends. That unfinished thing wasn't the connection. It was the silence around it. Silence that required effort. Silence that asked both of you to ignore parts of yourselves. That silence has done all it can do. It's no longer sustainable. You may feel moments of acceptance settling in. Not resignation. Acceptance rooted in self-trust. Acceptance that you don't need to control how this unfolds to be okay. That acceptance is freedom. This stage of the story isn't asking you to prepare emotionally. You're already prepared. It's asking you to stay where you are internally. Grounded. Aware. Honest. Honesty doesn't rush clarity. It allows it. As these 2 days continue, notice how little effort it takes now to stay steady. That steadiness is the clearest sign of growth. You're no longer suspended between hope and fear. You're standing on your own ground. Whatever decision is made will meet you there. And because you're standing firmly in yourself, that decision won't shake you. It will simply inform you. Information doesn't destabilize grounded people. It guides them. This story is moving toward truth, not spectacle. Toward alignment, not intensity. Toward resolution, not chaos. And you are ready for that. Not because you know what will happen next, but because you know you won't lose yourself, no matter what does. It comes with an unexpected softness, the kind that doesn't weaken you but loosens something you didn't realize you were holding. You might notice it in the way your jaw relaxes, in the way your breath deepens without effort. Nothing dramatic has happened yet, and still, something feels resolved at a deeper level. This softness isn't surrender. It's self-trust taking over. What's unfolding now isn't about suspense anymore. It's about coherence. For a long time, parts of this story lived in separate compartments. What you felt didn't always line up with what you told yourself. What you sensed didn't always match what you allowed yourself to hope. You learned to keep those parts apart so life could stay manageable. That separation kept things stable, but it also kept them incomplete. Right now, those compartments are dissolving. You may notice that your thoughts about this connection feel simpler. Not shallow, simpler. You're no longer adding layers of interpretation or self-protection. You're letting the truth exist without decoration. Simplicity isn't lack of depth. It's depth without distortion. Distortion once felt safer to you. Now, clarity does. On the other side, your soulmate has reached a similar internal state. They're no longer trying to manage the narrative in their head. They've stopped asking how things should look and started paying attention to how things actually feel. That shift is subtle but decisive. When people stop managing perception, they start honoring reality. Reality doesn't negotiate. This decision forming now isn't fueled by emotion alone. It's shaped by values. By an internal alignment between what they want to stand for and how they've been living. When values come into focus, choices narrow naturally. Not because options disappear, but because only one feels honest. Honesty simplifies life. You might sense that your own emotional landscape feels less cluttered. Old doubts don't surface as often. When they do, they don't linger. You're not swatting them away. They just don't stick. That's a sign that your inner foundation has strengthened. Foundations don't shout. They hold. Earlier, you might have felt compelled to interpret every signal. To read meaning into silence. To analyze tone, timing, absence. That compulsion came from wanting certainty. Now, certainty feels less important than integrity. You'd rather stay aligned than be reassured. Alignment has become your compass. This stage of the story isn't asking you to prepare emotionally for good news or brace for disappointment. It's asking you to notice how self-contained you feel. Not isolated. Contained. Like your sense of self isn't leaking into speculation or anticipation. Containment is emotional maturity. Your soulmate is standing in that same maturity. They're no longer externalizing their uncertainty. They're internalizing responsibility. Responsibility for choosing a life that doesn't require constant justification. Justification drains energy. Integrity restores it. That's why this decision feels inevitable rather than urgent. Inevitability doesn't rush. It settles into place once resistance ends. Resistance already did its work. It tested every alternative. What remains now is clarity without argument. You may notice that your body continues to respond with calm. Not numbness. Calm. The kind that allows you to stay open without bracing for impact. That physical response matters. It's your nervous system recognizing safety in truth. Truth no longer feels threatening to you. This didn't happen by accident. You practiced staying present through discomfort. You learned how to sit with unanswered questions without dissolving into them. That practice built resilience you're using now without thinking about it. Resilience doesn't announce itself. It shows up as steadiness. You might reflect on how differently you're relating to time. These 2 days don't feel like a ticking clock. They feel like a settling period, where something finishes aligning internally before becoming visible externally. Visibility is always the last step. Internal alignment comes first. Your soulmate understands that now. They're not rushing to communicate because the decision itself needs to feel stable before it's expressed. Expression without stability creates confusion. Stability creates clarity when expressed. Clarity doesn't need elaboration. You may also notice that your emotional language has changed. You're no longer framing this as, will it work, or will it last? You're asking quieter questions. Does this align? Does this feel honest? Does this respect who I am now? Those questions protect you. Earlier versions of you asked questions that centered on survival. Now, your questions center on congruence. Congruence between inner truth and outer life. That shift changes every outcome, regardless of what unfolds. Congruence is non-negotiable. This moment isn't asking you to be optimistic. It's asking you to be real. Real about what mattered. Real about what you learned. Real about what you will and won't accept going forward. Being real feels lighter than being hopeful. Hope once carried pressure for you. Pressure to be rewarded for patience. Pressure to justify waiting. You're not carrying that pressure anymore. You're not owed an outcome. You're grounded in alignment. Alignment doesn't demand repayment. It sustains itself. Your soulmate has released a similar pressure. They're no longer asking whether choosing truth will disrupt things. They've accepted that disruption is sometimes the price of integrity. And that price is lower than the cost of continued misalignment. Misalignment erodes slowly. Integrity rebuilds quietly. You might sense a growing neutrality toward outcomes. Not apathy. Neutrality born from self-trust. You trust that if something aligns, it will integrate into your life naturally. If it doesn't, you'll adjust without self-blame. Self-blame once kept you stuck. You don't live there anymore. This stage of the story reveals how little you need external confirmation now. You're not searching for validation. You're listening inwardly. That inward listening is steady, not emotional. It's informed by experience, not fantasy. Fantasy once filled gaps where clarity was missing. Clarity has closed those gaps. God's presence in this moment feels like quiet reinforcement rather than direction. A sense that you're allowed to move slowly. Allowed to listen carefully. Allowed to honor your values without apology. That permission matters. You're not being rushed by fate. You're being met by timing that waited until you were ready to remain whole regardless of outcome. That readiness is the real gift of this moment. You may notice that your sense of self feels expanded, not narrowed. You're not shrinking yourself to fit a possibility. You're allowing a possibility to meet you where you are. Meeting instead of molding. This decision will bring clarity, but clarity doesn't always look like movement toward. Sometimes it looks like clean separation. Both outcomes serve alignment when chosen honestly. You're prepared for either without fear. That preparation didn't come from detachment. It came from integration. You integrated lessons instead of carrying wounds. You integrated boundaries instead of building walls. Integration creates peace. You might feel gratitude surfacing again, quietly. Gratitude for lessons that taught you restraint. Gratitude for time that refined rather than wasted you. Gratitude for the ability to stay grounded now without effort. Those gratitudes signal completion. This stage of the story isn't closing doors or opening them dramatically. It's aligning hinges so whatever moves next does so smoothly. Smooth movement doesn't attract attention. It attracts stability. Stability is what lasts. As these 2 days continue, stay connected to this softness. Not softness as weakness, but softness as confidence. Confidence that doesn't need to harden to feel safe. You are safe now. Safe to acknowledge truth. Safe to remain present. Safe to let clarity arrive in its own time. Whatever decision completes itself here will meet you as someone grounded, aware, and intact. And because you're intact, the outcome won't define you. It will simply inform your next step. That's the quiet power of this moment. Not that everything is decided, but that you are. Looking back, you may realize that the hardest part wasn't not knowing what would happen. The hardest part was trusting yourself enough to remain open while not having control. You did that. Even when it felt uncomfortable. Even when it felt unfair. Even when silence lasted longer than you thought you could tolerate. That endurance changed you. You're not standing at the mercy of someone else's choice anymore. You're standing in alignment with your own values. You know what you can give. You know what you will not carry again. You know the difference between connection that feels grounding and connection that feels destabilizing. That knowledge doesn't leave you. If this chapter brought someone closer to you, it will be because alignment finally replaced avoidance. Not because you waited perfectly. Not because you proved your worth. But because truth was allowed to surface without being rushed or ignored. And if this chapter brought closure instead, it will be a clean one. Not a wound you reopen later. Not a question that follows you into future moments. A true ending that frees emotional space instead of occupying it. Both outcomes are victories when you remain intact. You may feel moments of quiet gratitude now. Gratitude not tied to what happened, but to who you became while it was unfolding. Gratitude for the restraint you learned. Gratitude for the boundaries you honored. Gratitude for the ability to stay present without needing certainty. That gratitude signals completion. Nothing about this ending asks you to forget what mattered. It asks you to release the weight of carrying it alone. What mattered mattered because it was real. And real things don't disappear when they end. They integrate. They inform. They refine. You don't need to protect yourself from feeling anymore. You know how to feel without losing yourself. That's the gift this journey gave you. From here, you don't move forward cautiously. You move forward grounded. Grounded enough to recognize alignment quickly. Grounded enough to step back when something doesn't feel right. Grounded enough to let life surprise you without fear. Surprise doesn't threaten grounded people. It expands them. You're no longer waiting for signs, timing, or permission. You've given yourself permission to live honestly. That permission stays with you no matter who enters or exits your life next. This story doesn't end with certainty about the future. It ends with certainty about you. Certainty that you can hold truth. Certainty that you can walk away without resentment. Certainty that you can stay open without abandoning yourself. That certainty is quieter than hope, but stronger. Whatever decision was made, whatever clarity arrived, it no longer sits above you. It sits beside you, integrated into who you are now. It doesn't define you. It informs you. And that's how you know this chapter is complete. Not because everything was resolved externally, but because nothing is unresolved internally anymore. You're not carrying the weight forward. You're carrying wisdom. And wisdom doesn't rush. It walks with you. That's the ending.